Hello and welcome back to Bicyclelegs Talks Music and another episode of The Sequel to Success. And can you please welcome back to the channel Mr. Rob Buchta from RushFans. Rob, I was so happy to have another topic to get you back on because I really enjoyed the shows that we did during the Bicyclelegs Discovered Rush series.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, and congratulations on your channel. You're growing. It's really really a pleasure to be here, and thank you for asking me to come back on. I really appreciate the
Yeah.
ask. Yeah.
And today we're going to be talking about probably one of the most well-known sequels to success, as it were, and that is Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. Now, this album, of course, the follow up to this behemoth here, Dark Side of the Moon. Now, Dark Side of the Moon was absolutely Pink Floyd's breakthrough album. It made them from sort of an underground band that were doing reasonably well into sort of global superstars, even though nobody knew what they looked like. But this album just was absolutely massive. Dark Side of the Moon was released on the 1st of March 1973 in the US. I think it was 16th of March 1973 in the UK. It got to number two in Australia, number two in the UK, and number one in the US. But that doesn't tell the whole story at all because the sales for this album 14 times platinum in Australia, 16 times platinum in the UK, 15 times platinum in the US. Just an absolute mammoth album, one of the best selling albums of all time. I mean, it was in the US charts for like 700 or 800 weeks or something
It's
ridiculous.
989 weeks, and as of April 2025, it's number 15 in vinyl album sales. So it's still selling units. It's amazing. 989, yeah, 989 weeks on Billboard Top 200. It's crazy.
That's just it is crazy.
Yeah.
So it was going to be a hell of an album to follow up, and the band had a lot of trouble coming up with a sequel to Dark Side of the Moon. They toured throughout 1974. They were playing Dark Side of the Moon in its entirety, and they were also playing some new songs. They were playing what would become Shine On You Crazy Diamond, and they were playing two other very lengthy tracks. One called You Gotta Be Crazy, and one called Raving and Drooling. They didn't end up making it onto the album because when they came to record the album, Roger in particular felt he started to get this idea for a theme for the album about absence. And so he came up with these other songs that he thought felt fit that theme better. And they would come back to Raving and Drooling and You Gotta Be Crazy. But we'll get to that when we talk about what came after Wish You Were Here. Rob, when did you first get into Pink Floyd?
I guess when The Wall came out was the big one. MTV was the place to be. They had the animated stuff that went with the record, on videos and that sort of thing. So I think Pink Floyd, The Wall was really the entry point for me. And then I went backwards and then continued along the way with them as things progressed. But yeah, I think I would definitely say The Wall is probably the one moment because I was getting into music in general in the 80s, pretty heavily, especially
Yeah.
rock music. So that's the one I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me too, the first Pink Floyd song I remember hearing was Another Brick in the Wall Part 2,
Mhm.
which, was a huge hit, got played on the radio a bunch. And we didn't have MTV or anything like that here at that stage, but we did have sort of music shows that would play on a Saturday morning and that sort of thing. And they would play the clip for Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. And but it really wasn't until I was very young then. I was only 9 years old when that song came out, 8, 9 years old. And so I really got into Floyd big time, sort of mid 80s. I started listening to The Wall and Dark Side and all those things. And then I remember when Momentary Lapse of Reason came out. That was the first Pink Floyd album that came out after I became a fan. So that album was very special to me, even though a lot of people will tell you it's not a great Pink Floyd album. I still like that album quite a lot because, it came out when I was becoming a big Pink Floyd fan, and I actually got to see them on the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour. 7th of February 1988, they played the Brisbane Entertainment Centre, and yeah, it was an incredible show.
Yes, you can't deny the thrill of seeing them live and what they do and all the props, the whole thing, the way things are put together, the lights, the whole, anybody that's seen them live, knows exactly the deal. But yeah, that was an exciting time.
And I was so glad I did see them on that tour too, because when they toured the Division Bell, they didn't come to Australia.
Oh wow.
So,
Yeah, good thing you
so
got
it
them.
was really the only chance I had, and thankfully I took it.
Yes.
So this is the album we're talking about today. Wish You Were Here.
Mm.
Originally released on the 12th of September 1975. We'll get into like how it did and sales and all that sort of thing at the end of the discussion. But let's go through it track by track because this is, as I say, this is a difficult birth album. It took them, oh, what, it was about a year to record this album, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like they January of 75 they started, and then I think they finally wrapped things up in July of that year. And they had stuff in between when they were recording. They toured for a short period of time, came back to finish up. And even this first track, there were two things that happened in the recording of this track, so which really delayed things even further.
Yeah,
One of the main problems was they got a new mixing desk in the studio at Abbey Road, and no one knew how to use it. So it was like there was a learning curve in getting that board to work properly, even to the point where they had an echo return on the board that was putting too much echo on the drums in particular. And back then, you had to record this track had to be recorded from beginning to end, full stop, no breaks, no cutting, no editing of 2-inch tape, because 16 tracks and 2-inch tape was like the thing back then. So you had to do a complete performance of the song. So they had to re-record it because they couldn't get rid of the echo. So they had to do the whole thing again. So, and then there's another part of the story later on
yeah,
that has to do with this particular track. So it was arduous.
yeah. So the album starts off with Shine On You Crazy Diamond, but Shine On You Crazy Diamond was a really long track, and they ended up splitting it into two for the album. And they basically bookend the album. It starts the album with Shine On You Crazy Diamond, and we finish with Shine On You Crazy Diamond. So we get what they describe as parts 1 to 5 to start the album. What are your thoughts on that first sort of section of Shine On You Crazy Diamond?
It's funny because like when you hear it as a younger person, it's as a curiosity, and you kind of sit and you absorb it in. It starts very, very slow, kind of winds its way in. Um, I wouldn't say foreboding, but I think it's a great sort of entry point, starting from nothing, and then just the sound that comes up, which is very sort of, I feel it's kind of biographical to the record in a way, where because they came from nothing with this album, and it kind of starts there. It's just a very subtle emergence of sound, and then it comes full on. Um, the famous, guitar arpeggio comes in. It's really atmospheric, and I think it really sets a calmer tone. But then it gets just more intense as it goes on, especially the second half. It gets very, very, very rowdy. So I think the way it starts the record is great, and the way it's bookended on the record is fantastic because then you have those three songs sandwiched in between. And thematically, it's great too. And I think even Rick Wright really enjoyed this record because of the way the music sounds. He has a huge role, obviously, on this tune. And of course, Dave kind of gets the glory in a way because of that guitar solo, that arpeggio I mentioned. So he kind of gets a bit of a shine, I guess, for lack of a better word. But I love the way the album starts. And getting back to listening to this record again was the thing like, oh yeah, you miss that feeling a little bit. We don't hear for a while, and then you put it back on. It's like, oh, all those moments of just sitting and listening. It's like almost like meditative to me, this particular
Yeah.
track. So I really enjoy it for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, and I found it, I actually listened to this album again, like just an hour before we came on air to record this. And, I was listening to it. I was obviously, you hear Dave Gilmour's guitar playing, that four notes, that ding, 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 kind of, it's one of the most haunting little riffs that's
Mm.
ever been concocted. But also, Rick Wright is all over Shine On You Crazy Diamond at the beginning and especially at the end of the album. And, his playing's great. But the thing I was really noticing in certain parts of this as I was listening to it is how underrated Nick Mason and Roger Waters are as a rhythm section
Hmm.
because they're not the flashiest players. You know,
Yes.
Rick Wright had great sort of jazz chops and, he was all that sort of thing. David Gilmour, obviously, is considered one of the greatest guitar players of all time. And I would find that very hard to argue with. He'd probably be in my top 10 easily.
Mhm.
But I think Roger Waters and Nick Mason don't get a lot of credit as a rhythm section because they're not flashy. They're not out there. Nick Mason's not Bill Bruford. He's not Neil Peart. You know, but I find his fills and what have you very tasty, and I
Mhm.
find that his basic beat too is so on point. And the same with Roger on the bass. He's not a Chris Squire. He's not a John Entwistle, but he's locked in the pocket. And especially on this song, there's certain parts where Nick Mason's just and he's just really, really giving it a groove. And Roger Waters is there on the bass with his sort of boom, 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 and it just, you know, not virtuoso stuff, but absolutely in service of the song.
Yes, very adequate, and it's a great point because you can, if you just heard the rhythm section by itself without anything else around it, which is the way they had to record the song, by the way. There was no like guitar
Mm.
track to go with. There's no vocal track to go with. They had to do it, the two of them, from beginning to end, straight through. So it's like, just to think of that is like mind blowing in a way because things are done a lot differently now with recording. And then just what you had just mentioned about the two of them is a huge testament to the two of them because they're so locked in, and that's any key to any rhythm section is how you lock in with either if you're the drummer locking with the bass and vice versa. So that's a huge testament to them, and underrated is the right word because it's simple, like you said. They're not, it's not Geddy and Neil, it's not John and Keith, but what they do is completely appropriate, and you want that underpinning underneath the keyboards because Rick's doing a lot of stuff. David's got his parts he fits in. So if you're laying that foundation down, you have the other people have room to play. And of course, as
Yeah,
a rhythm section, you can interact with that as well because the foundation's there. So they are foundation layers completely.
yeah, absolutely. And it gives, Richard Wright and David Gilmour the opportunity to create the atmosphere. And this, Shining Your Crazy Diamond, it's all about atmosphere, and just, people talk about Pink Floyd being great headphone music, and there really isn't a much better example of it than Shine On You Crazy Diamond, I don't think. So,
That's
and it's mostly instrumental. There's only two small verses in this section. There's only one small verse in the second section out of a song that, when you stitch them back together, is about 24 minutes long.
yeah, it's a lot of great band interaction, and it's kind of like the culmination of what happened with like Echoes, for instance, off Metal. So
Mm,
that time period brought into this album really kind of is the fruition of that time spent doing that type of playing as a group and building
yeah.
and constructing a sound and then bringing that into the fore on this was like sort of the top of the game in terms of the sonic result you get from um, this particular song on this record.
Yeah. So part four is the vocal part.
Mhm.
The song is obviously about their departed Sid Barrett. And when we talk about part two at the end, we might tell that little story about the certain visit that they got in the studio
Mm,
when they were finishing this song off. But
yeah.
and then part five, you get Dick Parry on saxophone, and I don't know about you, Rob. I might be a little controversial here. I like his playing on this song probably better than I like either of his turns on Dark Side of the Moon. And I love what he does on Dark Side on Money and Us and Them, but I think I like what he does here even better.
Yeah, it's a bit more. I don't know if I wouldn't say reckless, but it's definitely he's more open, I guess. There's more happening. He's putting more out there. Um, it's different, but it's again it fits the tune perfectly. This the fitting of him on there is what else would you want to hear? You know, I think it's pretty much right on the ball. So
Absolutely. And then part five, it segues through some sound effects and what have you into one of the pieces that Roger brought in sort of relatively late,
yeah.
a song that he wrote on his own, a song called Welcome to the Machine. And I have some very fond memories of this song because they played this when I saw them in 1988.
Oh, nice.
I mean, out of the four songs on this album, they played three of them in the show. They played Shine On You Crazy Diamond, they played Welcome to the Machine, and they obviously played the title track. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I love this song, and it's got a great, like when they were first playing it live on the Wish You Were Here tour, they had this wonderful background video done for it, like animated by Gerald
Yeah.
Scarfe, who would obviously come to do even more with them when the wall came around. But it's funny. Roger says that this album is about absence, but if you look at this song and the next song, there's a lot of sort of moaning and complaining about the music industry, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, even the album cover, the guy that's being burned, he's on fire.
Yeah,
So he kind of symbolizes the guy that's been burnt by the industry. You get the suits together. Yeah, I mean, I think at that point, it's funny because Floyd, in some ways, is probably at fault for this because, they achieved such stardom with Dark Side that the sort of it became an industry at that point. The music business became a music industry. So, and they weren't like deliberately trying to do that. They're just trying to form a band, write songs, go play shows, and that sort of thing, achieve some success, make a living out of it, and it became far more greater than the band thought it would. So hence these types of songs where he's griping about the music industry and the fact that as a student in school, he was told he wouldn't be a good writer. And then he discovered later, if I just wrote and told the truth, I'll be okay. So I guess this is sort of a truthful take on what was happening with the band at the time. And they were, and some of the other backstory about them was they wouldn't grant interviews. So I forget the guy's name. He might have been I think his last name was Schaefer. He was hired as their publicist, and they would tell all these press people, no, no, no. Can we get tickets? No. Can we get an interview? No. So his only job was to say no to press and that sort of thing. Um, and so when they did this record, they self-produced it. They had an engineer, someone mixed it for them, but the band themselves produced the record. So they had no industry people involved in the making of the record. So there's definitely a slant and some vitriol towards the music business because things changed a lot at this time, when they made this record and the resulting um, lyrics sort of showcase that, hey, come and have a cigar. We're going to make this song really big and all this sort of thing. So there's a lot of, hokey, type of conversations and pats on the back and that sort of thing. Which, it's something that kind of stayed with the band a little bit. And that also created a little bit of the atmosphere that the band was working under in terms of not being there, right?
yeah,
Wish you were here. So this idea that, the band themselves wasn't quite there, with each other. There's some animus happening within the band and some some other things we'll talk about. But I think, yeah, the lyrics are very, very poignant, very honest, I think. I think anybody that's experienced anything with a label as an artist can share their own stories. But yeah, there's some bitterness for sure. Absolutely. I definitely agree with you on that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think David Gilmour's vocal on this song, I think, is one of his most passionate
Yeah.
vocals ever. He's singing right up at the top of his
Way high.
range,
Yeah.
and really strained and deliberately so to give it that sort of emotion and that sort of frustration with,
That's a good
you
word.
know, being part of the machine and all that sort of thing. Musically, it's mostly synthesizers.
Yeah.
And it's mostly Richard Wright, but I think David Gilmour and Roger Waters do add a little bit on the synths as well on the VCS3. But
Yes.
mostly in the sort of sound effecty synthesizers. But I mean, you know, musically, it's basically keyboards and acoustic guitar. And there's no Nick Mason. I don't think is on this track at all. If he
No.
is, there's some. It's very lightest of light percussion, but there's no drums on this song at all.
Yeah.
Um, you know, there's a little bit of bass from Roger. You know, he's often doing that octave thing that he loves to do, that dong,
Oh.
dong, 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 you know.
Right.
So, um, yeah, I mean, musically, it's again, you know, this wasn't something they'd done much before, you know, this sort of squiggly synthesizers and that sort of thing. You know, even on Dark Side of the Moon, they used synthesizer quite a bit, but it was mostly for sort of sound effecty things like you know, On the Run and that sort of thing. Really, the only track where Richard Wright's playing a lot of synthesizer as a keyboard is Any Color You Like.
Right.
So, you know, most of the rest of the album, he's playing pianos and organs and that sort of thing. So this album, he's really getting into sort of the various synthesizers and giving Pink Floyd this more sort of technological sound,
Mhm.
which I think is really, really great. And
Yeah.
then this song ends by, you know, kind of zipping out, and then you just hear sort of like a party going on in the background as the
Yeah. Right. Yeah,
song
like a,
fades out. You know, you're just hearing these people sort of talking as if they're at a party or a soiree of some sort.
mhm.
Probably some record industry business.
I was just gonna say,
But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, talking about record industry, I think it's also worth pointing out that beginning with Wish You Were Here, Pink Floyd had signed a new record contract for sort of outside of the UK and Europe. They switched from being on EMI records to being on Columbia CBS. So, and they probably signed it with a nice big fat advance and all that sort of thing. So, but yeah, this is their first record. You know, in Australia, this was on CBS Records. It's got the label there, but you can probably see there the CBS
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
at the
It's
bottom
awesome.
there. But
Yeah.
yeah, so you know, I think that probably had something to do with it too, because I know they were pretty fed up with EMI in America. You know, Capitol Records they were on in America, and they were pretty fed up with them by the stage time of Dark Side of the Moon. So um, that probably fed into these tracks as well, I think.
Yeah. It's a, definitely they had no pressure either to like make another record after, Dark Side came
Mm,
out. They didn't have to do another record. They had the only pressure that was there was on themselves. They kind of added that into the mix. So it's interesting too, seeing them continue on even after all that. But I think as they felt like there's still, I wouldn't say like life in the band, obviously, but I think just the fact that they um, continued on is interesting because it almost feels contradictory to like what they were speaking about in the record with this animus towards the industry, and then they pursued and carried forward. But I think even Roger had said at one point that when you have what was the word he used? There were if you when you have um, a golden goose like Pink Floyd, it's hard to step away from that. So there's some fear in the mix as well, even with reflected in the lyrics of these songs. Fear is another part of the mix. Like, what do you do after, there is life after a band, but at that stage of the game, it was better to keep it moving than to take a chance and not be the unit and go off on separate directives, and directions and things like that. So they
yeah,
kind of
and
had a qualm,
yeah,
creatively in terms of
and
what direction to go.
And I think doubly so because they it would have been so much harder for them, especially at this stage in their career, for Roger or David to go solo because they were such a faceless band,
Yes. Yeah.
you know. To the point where, Roger used to, in the 70s, he would go walking through the crowd before the show
Right.
and people wouldn't recognize him.
No.
So, it would have been very difficult. So, yeah, we get more of this when we look at side two and we start off with the song Have a Cigar, which is the lead vocal is not done by any of the members of Pink Floyd. It's done by their good friend Roy Harper.
Mhm.
And there's a bit of a story behind that, isn't there, as to
Yeah.
why Roy Harper ended up doing the lead vocal.
Yeah, he was doing his own album at the time, and then I guess David was asked if he could sing, and he bowed out. And so, with the little prodding, being that they're mates, the band and Roy, he decided to come in and do all the bits, and then even to the point where they tried to bring him out on some shows, hey, come out and sing, sing this tune. So there's a friendship there, and I think just creatively, Roy had some reservations because he never sang other people's lyrics. He
Mm.
didn't do that sort of thing. So the fact that he agreed to do that, I think is I never even knew for a long time that it was actually him singing that song. I thought it was Roger. I'm like, that doesn't sound like Roger. Who the hell is it? And then it took a minute to figure out. And of course, you read the line notes, you find out right away. But hearing it for the first time was like, that doesn't sound like anybody in the band. Who the hell is that? Is it something wrong with the mix? What's going on? So I didn't realize till later on, that it was actually, Roy Harper singing that. And I was like, wow, so I was kind of blown away that that's the only Floyd tune that I know of that is not sung by any of the other, you know, not sung by members of the band. There's other people coming
Yeah.
in. I think this might have been the only time that they had a lead vocal by somebody else. I'm not sure. I could be wrong. So that was kind of a first in a way, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the story I always heard was that Roger tried to sing the song and couldn't because he was having a bit of trouble with his voice at the time when they were recording it.
Yeah.
He asked David to sing it, and David kind of demurred because he wasn't a huge fan of the lyric. Like
Right.
he thought it was a little bit too whiny and complainy about the industry and that sort of thing. So that's when David brought Roy in because David and Roy were big, big mates. David plays on a number of Roy Harper's albums and that sort of thing. So he brought him in. Apparently, I don't know if this is a true story or not, but Roy is said to believe that his price for doing the vocal was that he wanted a lifetime membership to Lord's Cricket Ground.
Very cool. Hats off to
Um,
Roy Harper. Yeah.
yeah, and he claims that he never got it. So I
Okay.
don't know if the band stiffed him on that or whatever. But um, I think in the context of this song, it actually makes sense that they got somebody else outside the band to sing the song because I mean the lyric is written from the point of view of a record executive.
Right.
So it kind of made sense to get somebody who wasn't part of the band sing it,
Yeah. Right.
especially
By the
when
way,
you
which
get,
ones? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That was what I was about to say, especially when you get to that lyric. Well, oh, by the way, which one's pink?
Yeah.
But and again, I mean, great guitar on this song, isn't it? That great that
Yeah.
and
Really nice direction.
yeah,
And
and
keyboards.
yeah, absolutely. Great sort of electric piano on this song, and
Yes.
that feel they would revisit much later when they did the Division Bell and they did the song "What Do You Want From Me."
Yeah.
It's got that
Yeah.
same sort of have a cigar feel to it.
Mhm. Yeah. At the
So,
beginning of this contrapuntal, there's a lot happening in that
mm,
three person unit. So yeah.
so it's a really great song. The lyric is, probably one of the wittiest lyrics I think that Roger Waters ever did, certainly within Pink Floyd. He was often so, dark with his lyrics and that sort of thing. So to hear him do something that sounds a lot more playful, I mean, even though it's still making a very sort of satirical point, lyrically, there's jokes in this song, and
Yeah,
I love that about it. And
yeah,
it's not something you get in a lot of Pink Floyd, so that makes it stand out for me as well.
yeah. A lot of the insider, about being green and the way that's performed, by Roy
Yeah,
is fabulous. So just the phrasing he does, and just that very, like you said, the humor part of that is really, really intrinsic in this
yeah,
tune. You can definitely feel the humor, and it just feels very biographical about the industry itself and the approach to the band. There's a
yeah,
different relationship at work now. So
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
I mean, and then you know, I love how it segues into Wish You Were Here too, because they're playing that do 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 do, and then it goes, and then
yes,
all of a sudden it sounds like it's coming out of a tinny little
yeah,
transistor radio, AM
yeah,
transistor radio, and then they start fiddling through the channels till they eventually find the acoustic guitar riff at the beginning of Wish You Were Here.
yeah.
It's one of their great segues, I think, too.
I love that. And even they did some of that stuff on the wall too, which is really cool. Hearing the TV
Yeah,
channels switching this 18, 20 stages of crap on the TV, that kind of thing. So you're
yeah,
hearing the clicking of the thing. So that all those sound effects was so like big at that time. We take it for granted, but it was like at that time it was a pretty big deal. Just the analog
mm,
sounds and how they're put together was a very big deal back then. It was like it felt very futuristic. So and that wind sound too that comes out of that is really cool at the end.
mm.
You know, so
But we get the title track, Wish You Were Here. And like, I know you're a musician, Rob.
mhm.
When I was a teenager, I started to teach myself how to play guitar. And one of the first things I think anybody who was my age in the 80s, sort of mid 80s, picking up a guitar, an acoustic guitar for the first time, one of the first things you tried to teach yourself was that opening bit of
Yeah,
Wish You Were Here, that down, 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 down,
yeah,
down, down, down. You
yep,
know, I don't know what your experience was. I mean, I can see a guitar in the background there, but
yeah,
it's one of those things that you'll hear buskers play. You're walking down the mall in your local town, shopping mall, and there'll be a busker there, and one of the things he's bound to bust out is "Wish You Were Here." It's
yes,
again for a Pink Floyd song. You didn't get a lot of this on Dark Side of the Moon, but you would get it on earlier Pink Floyd albums. You would get these more standard sort of songs that you could sing along to,
yes,
even though the lyric is, kind of cryptic.
right.
Um, it's got a very singable melody. It's got it's in a basic 4/4. It's, it's very radio friendly, especially for
Oh,
Pink
yeah.
Floyd.
Yeah, and they're not really known as a radio band, and
Hmm.
I don't think they really wanted to be that. So, but it's interesting that things evolved that way, just from what they created, just happened to wind up, on radio to the point
Yeah.
now where "What Should We Hear" is a staple, both, what you hear on the radio and also as a upcoming musician like yourselves and myself, where you get that tune down. It's like, oh, this is great, to be able to play
Hmm.
the song as a player is fantastic. So it's one of those penultimate songs that, once you get it down, and then the lyrical part, getting that down too, is fantastic. And the singer to be able to sing that song, is
Yeah.
another nice feature.
But, and I think this song is one of those great examples of what made Roger and David such a great team.
Hmm.
You've got Roger's lyric and you've got David's music, and,
Yeah,
it just works so well together, you know. Um, and I used to love trying to pass those lyrics as
mhm.
a teenager, trying to understand, um, did they get you to trade your heroes for ghosts, hot ashes for trees, hot air for a cool breeze, and
Yes,
trying to work out, exactly what Roger was trying to say there.
yeah, yeah. The meaning of the song is definitely at a young age, it's more elusive, I think. but as you get a little older, it's like,
Mm.
oh, okay, I see where he was going with this. So yeah, it takes a minute to kind of, like you said, to parse it out. Like, what is he talking about here? You know. So yeah,
Yeah,
so the absence feature, you know.
yeah. And then it segues into the second half of Shine on You Crazy Diamond, and that's where you get that wind sound. And I'm pretty
Yes.
sure that's created on an analog synthesizer. Like
Yeah,
it
that
might be
was
a
very.
VCS3 synthesizer that they use for that particular sound.
Mhm.
Although I know they're using a bunch of other synthesizers on this album too. I think there's Mini Moog, and there's might even be some ARP synthesizers as well on this album. But
Yeah.
um, but I'm pretty sure the Wind is the old VCS3 that they used a lot on Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, you get
And then
those
it
really
goes
great
into
sounds.
this. We get parts 6 to 9 at the end here, and part 6 is again a bit unusual for Floyd in that it's almost funky, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you didn't really hear that type of funk like with songs like I guess with Echoes way into the tune towards the end it gets more funky, you know. And then
Mm,
David's got that backwards plugged in guitar sound with the whammy and the whole thing. That's probably the most funky I've heard of them, and it until this song came up, you know. So
yeah. And
yeah.
then part 7, you get the third and final verse of the song.
Mhm.
Again, we were talking about it when we were talking about part 1. This is a 24-minute track, and there's probably 2 minutes of vocals total.
Right. Yeah.
And the rest of it is all instrumental. And I think going forward, David started to miss that.
Mhm.
He felt that, especially on an album like The Wall, I think he felt that that album was too wordy and there
Mm.
wasn't enough room for instrumental passages and that sort of thing.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that kind of makes sense with The Wall because The Wall's basically a rock opera. So,
Yes.
um, but yeah, I think David particularly liked the room to play instrumentally. And doesn't he, and particularly Richard Wright, on this second half, this part 6 to 9, I think is some of Richard's best ever playing.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, all the instruments he's playing too. He's playing synthesizer on this. He's playing electric piano on this. We get into part 8, and he's on the clavinet on that, which is one of my favorite keyboard instruments. I absolutely love clavinet.
Yeah.
Um, when I think clavinet, I think of two completely different players who used to use
Hmm.
clavinet quite a lot. Obviously, Stevie Wonder, you think Superstition and things like that. But
Oh
then
yeah.
I don't know how familiar you are with the band Gentle Giant. Kerry
I
Minnear
heard.
from Gentle Giant used a lot of clavinet as well. And
Yeah.
so I love that instrument to death. So,
Hmm.
and
I think
then
that's why
part
Richard likes this
nine,
record so much. Yeah. Hmm.
and then part nine is almost entirely keyboards. In fact, part 9 is credited solely to Richard Wright, whereas the rest of Shine On You Crazy Diamond is credited to Waters Wright Gilmore.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
the part 9 is credited solely to Richard Wright, and he absolutely plays some beautiful synthesizer and grand piano. We get grand piano on this part.
Yes.
Um, and then a little bit at the end, he gives a little bit of See Emily Play
Yeah. A little
right at the
quoting. Sure.
end.
Yeah. Yep.
Just
I
that
guess why
little
he like
nod to
enjoys this
Sid
record so
again.
much. Yeah.
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 So yeah, I alluded when we were talking about part 1 of Shine On Crazy Diamond to a certain visitor that the band had during the recording and mixing of Shine On You Crazy Diamond.
Yeah. Yeah. The individual is Sid Barrett, and he showed up on the mix down of the song. And he came in, no one knew who he was. He was, just polite, but he kept jumping up and down and brushing his teeth. And no one knew who this guy was. He didn't cause any trouble or anything. He wasn't a nuisance, but they couldn't figure who he was. And after a little bit, maybe a half hour, 45 minutes, they're like, that's Sid, And I think even Roger had told Richard. David didn't know. I think maybe Nick might have realized it was him. And they got kind of emotional because out of all days for him to show up was the mix down of this song that was pretty much dedicated to him. And
Yeah.
the fact that they missed him, they hadn't seen him in 2 or 3 years as well, and that was the last time they saw him as well. So that was it. But
Mm.
very interesting. He had shaved his eyebrows. He was completely bald. He was heavy.
Yeah.
So that's part of, I guess, why they didn't recognize him. From
Yeah,
last time they
absolutely.
saw him, he probably had hair and thin and the whole thing. So
Well, yeah, I mean, he was considered a bit of a style
yeah,
god, in the late 60s and that sort of thing. You look at those early Pink Floyd photos and he's got the great clothes and he's got the hair and he's got.
yeah,
And then, yeah, as you say, he comes in. I'll put a picture up on screen. He comes in
yeah,
because they did take a picture of him when he was at the studio that day. And
yeah.
he's overweight. He's not huge, but he's
Oh,
definitely, heavier than he had been. His
right.
head was shaved bald. His eyebrows were shaved off. He didn't look anything like the Sid Barrett that everybody knew from,
Yeah,
Piper at the Gates of Dawn and all that sort of thing.
yeah,
So it would have come as quite a shock. And
yeah,
yeah, as you say, they never saw him again. And that was kind of by choice because apparently his sister used to say that Sid would get upset when he was reminded of the Pink Floyd days and that sort of thing.
yeah.
Um, when he was, he went back to using his name Roger.
Hmm.
He didn't call himself Sid anymore. He basically stayed at home. He potted around the garden. He painted, and and lived off the royalties that he had from that first Pink Floyd record and those two solo albums that he did.
Yeah,
So it's a tragic story, Sid. And we lost him back in, I think it was 2006.
yeah. I think it
So
was, yeah. Rick passed in 2009. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
It's a pretty
yeah, I
amazing
mean
story. Yeah.
yeah. And this album is dedicated to Sid. Shine on You Crazy Diamond is about him, but the theme of absence, who's more absent in the Pink Floyd story than Sid Barrett?
Absolutely.
So this album, well, I mean, obviously it didn't do as well as Dark Side of the Moon because Dark Side of the Moon was one of the all-time biggest selling albums.
Hmm.
It still did really, really well,
Well,
this album. It got to number one in Australia, number one in the UK, number one in the US. It is 7 times platinum in Australia. Surprisingly, only double platinum in the UK,
well,
6 times platinum in the US. So, I mean, still, by any measure, a huge
yeah.
success. And I have to
Mhm.
ask you, Rob,
Yes.
Dark Side of the Moon or Wish You Were Here? Which one do you
Oh,
prefer?
that's hard because I respect that this album was essentially created from nothing. Um, and we have this amazing work from that. Ooh, yeah, that's tricky. You hate to say the one that's the biggest one because it's almost like it's automatic. Um,
Mm,
I like them both for different reasons. I guess if I was to pick one, I think I got Dark Side before I got Wish You Were Here. So I probably would say Dark Side of the Moon would be the one,
yeah,
but
no,
very
fair
close
enough.
tie with Wish You Were Here.
Yeah.
So
Well, I've got to say, Wish You Were Here is actually my second favorite Pink Floyd
okay,
album.
yeah,
So, Dark Side of the Moon, I love to death, but I think I've got a little bit of a familiarity breeds contempt feeling with that album because I've heard it so many times.
yeah, you get ear
You know,
fatigue.
I've heard Wish You Were Here a lot too, but Dark Side of the Moon, you just hear it so many times. And I still think it's a great, I'm a bit like that with Sergeant Pepper with the Beatles too, which
Mhm.
I think is still I love that album to death, but I don't rank it as highly as some other Beatles albums just
Right.
because I've heard it too many times.
Yeah.
But
It's funny
yeah,
because like if you ask me next week what my favorite of the two would be, it'd probably be Wish You Were Here. So it just depends. Like it depends on,
yeah,
what happens in your listening routine through the week, what you listen to and what kind of picks up on you and this nostalgia
yeah,
and this feelings of hearing these things for the first time, et cetera, et cetera. So I think if you ask me
yeah,
next week, I probably would say Wish You Were Here. So
Yeah.
maybe not. I don't know.
So, what came after this? They went on tour, obviously, and the tour basically the set list was set one was Wish You Were Here, set two was Dark Side of the Moon, and then they might play an encore of something from the earlier catalogue.
Right.
Would have been a great show. I would have gone, for sure. But then for the next album, Roger came up with another idea, and it was the theme of, sort of George Orwell's Animal Farm kind of thing, of classifying people as different kinds of animals. And he brought
Mhm.
back You Gotta Be Crazy, and he brought back Raving and Drooling, and he worked those into the concept, reworked the lyrics a little bit. The first one, You Gotta Be Crazy, became dogs,
Mhm.
Raving and Drooling became sheep, and the album became animals.
Yes.
Now, spoiler alert for people who haven't seen my Pink Floyd studio albums ranked, this is my favorite Pink Floyd album. And I, I I first heard sheep before I heard animals because I had the compilation album, A Collection of Great Dance Songs,
Yes.
and that's got sheep on it, and I loved sheep from hearing it
Yeah.
on A Collection of Great Dance Songs.
Hmm.
Um, Possibly lyrically their darkest album because there really
Yes.
is no respite on this album. Even on The Wall, there's a couple of lighter moments.
Yeah.
Um, Not on Animals.
No,
Animals is
not at all.
a sort of unremittingly dark album, but
Yeah.
musically, I find it some of their most just rewarding music.
Yeah. I think even
And
David like that too. Yeah.
yeah, but this is to me of their sort of classic period. This is the Lost album because Dark Side of the Moon was a huge hit,
Hmm.
massive hit. Wish You Were Here was big, not as colossal as Dark Side of the Moon, but as we saw, still multi platinum album. The Wall would come after Animals and would be their second best selling album after Dark Side of the Moon.
So, mhm.
But Animals, it got to number three in Australia, it got to number two in the UK, and it got to number three in the US. It's certified platinum in the UK. It's certified four times platinum in the US, so still not too shabby.
Yeah.
Didn't certify at all in Australia, funnily enough.
It's weird. Wow.
Not even gold. So,
Wow.
but it kind of is the forgotten album among that sort of classic Pink Floyd. But I feel like in the last 5 years or so, this album has really started to get a huge critical reappraisement, and people are really starting to recognize the brilliance of the album Animals.
Yeah. I prefer that. I prefer it to Wish You Were Here. You know,
Mm,
it's just the guitar work on it is amazing. Rick's got some signature intro parts. I mean, on Sheep, for instance, it's like just great keyboard playing, and you just know
yeah,
the song when you hear that keyboard part, you know exactly what's coming.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just a brilliant record.
So there you have it, everyone. Those are our thoughts on Wish You Were Here. Rob, thank you so much for doing the show.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate having you back on the channel. I will leave a link in the description to RushFans. You can go and have a look at their stuff, um, both on YouTube and on Instagram. I believe you've got a Facebook page now as well.
Yeah, just started the Facebook page. It's up and running. You can go there and check out everything. It's all
Yeah.
there. Just started like about a week ago. So
Yeah. So please let us know in the comments what your thoughts on Wish You Were Here are, specifically as it relates to being a follow-up to Dark Side of the Moon. Please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to go and have a look at some of my other Sequel to Success episodes, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my Bicyclelegs Discovers Rush series, which Rob was on, I also have a playlist for those. And if you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other places. I also have a dedicated bicyclelegs Facebook page and a bicyclelegs Teespring. Links are all in the doobly-doo. Please do give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.